Okay, so I'm very humbled that you asked me and very touched that you asked me this question. But I like to do a disclaimer that everybody, um, what works for me may not work for you. This is what I do, and other people might have different methods of doing this work. I hope other people chime in as well. So the first thing I do right after I notice something bothers me is I identify what the feeling is. Am I disturbed? Am I disgusted? Am I angry? Am I hurt? Um, I try to put a descriptor on the feelings that I'm having. Sometimes, most of the time, when something bothers me, it's complicated. It's not just one feeling. It's like, you know, um, it'll be a mixture of, jealousy and hurt and, confusion. It won't ever be just one thing. So first the first thing I do is identify what it is, what the feeling is, what's the bother. The second thing I do, and sometimes that might take this is not an instantaneous process. Sometimes that might take some days or, it depends on how much energy I have in that moment. Like if I'm in the middle of work or something, or I got something going on that I have to attend to, I may not get a chance to come back to that and examine it for a couple of days or something. So I want you to keep in mind, this is not like a quick process. It can be long. Sometimes it's quick and sometimes it's not. So the first thing is identify what the feeling is. The second thing is I try to identify the thought behind the feeling. So I'll use jealousy. I hardly ever get jealous. I just never have. Depends on the situation. There's been some situations when I'm like, but most of the time that's not the case. Well, let's just say that I have jealousy, right? So first, once I identify what that feeling is, that I think I might be low key jelly, right? Or maybe not so low key. Then I start figuring out, okay, what was the thought? What are the thoughts that I have right underneath that feeling? So I try to get at what was the thought I had. And then once I get the answer to that, then I try to identify where the thought came from. So for instance, the last relationship that I had where I suffered from a lot of jealousy, oftentimes the thought I identified was that, he didn't want me anymore. So, those thoughts of, the fear of not being wanted anymore is what would, bring about the jealousy when I encountered something in the environment that triggered it. You see what I mean? And that's another part of figuring out the thought behind it, is also figuring out the trigger, the environmental trigger. Because a lot of times when you have a feeling, something in the environment triggered that. So in the process of figuring out the thought behind it, that thought was a response to something that triggered that feeling. Um, so I identified that. And from there is when it depends on if this is a new situation, a new feeling that I've never felt, or a new, like I've had encountered something that I haven't ever encountered before, and now I have these feelings about it, or if it's a something that I normally feel one way about, but when I encounter it, but this time I felt a different way. Then I have to dig up to, okay, so now I understand what I'm thinking. Where did this thought come from? What is this thought rooted in? Is it rooted in an insecurity? Is it rooted in a fear? Is it rooted in what? So digging to the root of what that thing is. And, so it's like when I process emotions, that are in reaction to something someone did, for example, I always try to, once I get past my initial bother and it's calming down, I'll, say, okay, why is this shit bothering me? And that's when I start this process that I'm telling you about. So the first step is always to identify what it is that I'm feeling. That's the first thing. Then identify the thoughts underneath those feelings, figure out what those thoughts are, what are they in response to, and then dig into the root of why I had those thoughts. And I have anxiety, so a lot of times my thoughts are very much fear based. So many times I'll be bothered by something, and it'll be, if I dig underneath that feeling or that bother, it'll be fear based, you know. So I think knowing those baseline things about yourself, like what your triggers are, what things activate you, what traumas you might have that are still in process with healing, can help you expedite this work more easily. There are certain things that I don't have to think very long to know why I'm bothered by it, because it's a familiar activation point for me based on my history, you know? So basically that's what I do. And I always, if it takes me a minute to get past that initial aggravation, and that aggravation will be, it'll be pointed outward at first. Eventually I get down to saying, okay, now let me think about myself. Let me put this back on me so I can deal with it in a way that's empowering, instead of feeling I'm at the mercy of the shit that happens to me at the hands of the world or other people or what have you. So I hope that was helpful, Courtney, and we can follow up if you want to talk some more, but that's the answer that I have at first. And remember, it may work for you, it may not work for you. There's also a strategy called the 5 whys that one of my kink mentors helped me with, where you ask a question to yourself, and then you say, you get the answer, and then you say why. Why do you feel that, or why do you think that? And then you answer that, and then you say, why do you think that? So you do that like 5 times to get down into the root of what's going on, because a lot of shit is buried in us and we don't examine it closely, and that's why we do shit and we don't know why we do it, or we feel shit and we don't know why we feel it. So anyway, that's my answer. Let me know if you want to talk some more.